So let's talk about different kinds of light sources now. Artificial light sources. The electronic flash is probably the most common and the most popular, only because you have one on most of your cameras built in, whether it pops up when needed or it's over to the side of the viewfinder. But it's a little teeny xenon tube that when there's not enough light, it will turn itself on and add light to the scene. I like to call it the ugly light because it comes right from the camera and it has this sort of paparazzi look, and it flattens people's faces out, and it doesn't really add a lot of drama to the room. It makes everything look flat and one-dimensional. So it's, to me, electronic flash on camera is the last choice once you've run out of every other option to compensate for not enough light in the room. Okay? And we'll talk more about its ugliness later. So they're built into the camera. There's a hot shoe on top of your camera on most of them, where you can put a little more high-end flash on it that still is able to talk to the camera, but the light still comes right from the camera. There's other ways of attaching a flash to the end of the lens. You've seen that on some of these CSI shows on TV, whether it's a ring or two little flashes, where it comes right from the lens itself, very, very close to the center. So it does intentionally make things look very flat without a lot of depth to them if you're analyzing a texture or surface. And then there's these studio strobes or off-camera strobes, flashes that you can use that go on light stands that you can modify in many, many different ways. You can trigger them even though the camera's not physically attached to the flash. It can be attached via radio wave, via infrared, or a really long cable. And in these strobe sort of studio lights, there's a version where it's got all of the power and a pack that sits on the ground and a bunch of satellite heads, or a mono light that has all the electronics and power and capacitors built into the head itself, and all you do is plug that in. And most of these lights have ways to synchronize themselves together by triggering off of another flash. When it sees a flash, that one goes off too, so you get basically all the lights going off at effectively the same time when you're making the photograph. So you can synchronize them pretty easily these days with some pretty inexpensive equipment. Well, the good news about electronic flash is it's balanced for daylight. So if you're shooting in a room and you want to see out the windows, if you use the electronic flash inside, the color temperature is going to be the same. The other thing about electronic flashes, they're very, very bright. I said before, there's no light source as bright as the sun. Well, there's some electronic flashes that our friend Doc Edgerton, that we'll talk about in the history section, invented, that are almost as bright as the sun. They're very, very, very bright. So they're intense light sources, very short duration, but during that duration it lets out a tremendous amount of light. And in the case of the flashes that are mounted on our camera or a part of our camera, they're very portable. They come with us everywhere we go. If we find ourselves in a situation where there's not a lot of light, the flash is always backup. It's always there. And the fact that they're built into most cameras makes it a convenient light source as it is. So the bad news is, in most cases, it's fixed to the camera, and that's not a particularly interesting place for the light to come from. It makes the light kind of ugly, right? It's specular or a hard light. So we go back 2 or 3 slides on that mannequin, and it's going to have those harsh shadows everywhere, not that soft transition. Because it's built into the camera and it sort of works automatically, in a lot of cases you don't have a tremendous amount of control over the flash. It just goes off when it thinks it needs to and gives you the amount of light it thinks you need. And you have a few controls over it with the professional models, but with the prosumer models, those just go away. And it just does what it does. The other thing about electronic flash, that if we use a LED light or use an incandescent light or a fluorescent light, it's on all the time. So when we put our subject in that light source, we can see what it's going to look like. With electronic flash, the only time the light actually hits the subject is when the flash goes off. And sometimes it's so quick we can't even see what it looks like until we look at the image in the back of our camera. Good news is we can look at it pretty quickly, decide if we like it or not. But that idea that we have a continuous light source, light on all the time, versus a discontinuous light source, it makes it a little more difficult to operate, figure out, maximize. And then because the flash is a burst of light, we have to make sure that the flash is synchronized with the shutter. So when the shutter opens, the flash goes off and then the shutter closes. If the shutter opens and closes, then the flash goes off, it doesn't do much good. Remember, the shutter is like a curtain in front of the sensor. Right? So we need to time it specifically. When that shutter opens, the flash is triggered, and then it closes. So there needs to be some ways to having the camera and the flash talk to each other, whether it's a very sophisticated, integrated into the camera system, or it's that hardwire or that radio or infrared slave that I was talking about earlier. But somehow we have to trigger the flash at the precise moment that the shutter's open. So here's an example of doing that with the upper left, and then lower right, the shutter's completely closed when the flash goes off. So this is a focal plane shutter that moves up and down. So at 1/80th of a second, the shutter opens up completely and the flash goes off. The shutter closes. At 250, the shutter doesn't open up all the way. It opens up for a slit and moves across. So the shutter opened up and started moving across. The flash went off and it continued moving. So it got part of the picture, but part of it didn't get any light at all. And less at 350, less at 500, and at 750, you have nothing. The shutter went through its entire cycle, and then the flash was triggered. So the other thing to remember is that you have to use a particular shutter speed, or there's a maximum shutter speed you can use to synchronize the flash with the camera. Usually, this is an older camera, so it's 180. Most cameras now will 1/250th of a second. It'll synchronize with your flash. If you have a built-in flash, the camera's not going to allow you to go over the sync speed. It's going to try to help you not make a mistake, okay? Unless you're in manual, and then you could mess anything up. Okay, so we have to be careful of the synchronization. With electronic flash, we can shape the light. We can change the quality. We can bounce the light off of things to change the size of the light source. Cards, we can bounce the light off the ceiling or walls. We can put the camera on special mounts. And even lately, that's probably 7 or 8 years, there's been a real big push to take these speed lights, small little camera mountable lights, and rig them up on light stands with modifiers so that you can put them off camera somewhere. But the fact that they use 4 or 6 AA batteries means they're very portable, they're very small, they're very light, right? And you can pack a whole bunch of light in a very small bag. So it's become kind of a popular way. But remember, you can't see the light until it goes off. So there's a little bit of a pre-work that you have to do. Okay? But you can very effectively shape the light that's built into the camera if you have to. Okay? So here's an example of different ways of shaping a flash mounted to the top of the camera. Okay? So this is one of the camera mountable flashes. This is also a flash that you can take the head and you can articulate straight up, or you can do a 360 with it. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility than the flash that just pops up above the viewfinder. You can't really do the same thing with that. You have to have the flash that's mounted to the camera. So here's no flash, fluorescent lights, as you can see, kind of raccoon eyes going on there, deep seated eye sockets, and it's dark. There's no light in her eyes at all. Light's coming from above. Okay. Here's that direct flash pointed directly at her face. You can see the contrast. Now all of a sudden the background's dark. All we have is her face properly lit. Okay? But we're seeing her eyes, certainly. We're seeing all of her face, illuminating just that oval of her face. That's it. Okay? Here's taking that flash and just aiming it at the ceiling. So it's kind of mimicking what the fluorescent lights are. Right? Coming straight down. But I can position where that circle of light hits, whether it's directly over her head or a little bit in front of her or even, sort of behind me on the ceiling. So I can change that. Now, if you're going to bounce the light off the ceiling better be white, and it shouldn't be a 12-foot cathedral ceiling with dark wood up there because it's not going to reflect very much. So if you don't have a ceiling lights in a classroom or in an office building, this bouncing off the ceiling thing won't work. But it's certainly a way to make the flash a little bit less ugly. So here I took the head and I turned it around, and it's bouncing off of a whiteboard directly behind me. You can see the catch lights in her eyes. The light's coming more from the front of her, not so much from the top. All right, so a little different way of illuminating your face. And then all I did, instead of having it at the ceiling, is I spun the head around, pointed it behind me, and pointed at a wall. Up a little bit, so I didn't shadow the light. So the light could bounce off the wall and then come and hit her face. Now that doesn't work if the walls are green or red or orange or pink, unless you want the subject to be that color. You don't have white walls, you're stuck. So now I've taken a card and I've mounted it to the back of the flash. The head's pointing straight up at the ceiling, but there's a white card right on the back of the flash. It's about a 16 by 20 piece of cardboard with a rubber band and a pencil. Nothing fancy. So some of the light is going up to the ceiling and bouncing back down, but some of the light's hitting that card and pushing forward. And so this means that if you have a ceiling you can reflect off of, but not a wall, you can use this card. Push light a little bit forward. There's also a YouTube video where I did this exercise live, and you can see what the results were. Okay, see what the equipment looked like that I had set up. So here's the 5 examples that we just went through. Fluorescent light, direct flash, ceiling bounce, wall bounce, and ceiling with a card. Same camera, same flash, same subject, same room. Everything's the same. I just started shaping that flash differently. So which one do you like the best? Maybe direct flash because you don't see the bags under her eyes. Maybe wall bounce because it minimizes them, but it's softer light. Maybe not ceiling bounce because you do tend to see that little extra skin under her eyes. I don't know. Different people, different light sources. This is where you have to experiment. Okay? But I just want to get across that this is the same light, same everything. I just shaped it. I just thought about it. I said, photographers are problem solvers. Photographers figure out a way to change the light to work to their advantage. Whatever that is. Direct or very diffuse. Okay? So, the other thing that electronic flash works very well at is fill. And in a situation like this, I could take a white card and I could reflect some of that light from the window back into the side of her face and into the face of the dog so we can see them, or I can just pop on the flash. Now all of a sudden, right, by turning on the flash, I get all this beautiful detail in the foreground and still that rim light from the sun. So using the flash as a fill card, flash fill, is a really interesting way to deal with lighting a subject when you're on the run, when you're in a hurry. Right? And outside with the sun, things get very contrasty. So the idea of using a flash outside in the sun is not a bad idea to illuminate those eye sockets, get a little bit more light in the face, and still take advantage of the sun being the dominant light source in the frame. There's my buddy Jimmy again backlit by the sun, but his eyes are gone, right? And so there's a flash. So now I have the little specular highlight in the eyes. I have that rim light from the sun, but now I can see his face. Compared to this, I don't know. If you don't like cats, you don't care. If you like cats, probably you're going to go for this before you're going to go for this. Okay? So flash can really be your friend, and it's specular, and it's coming from the camera, but it's not the dominant light source. So here's a couple of websites that probably are on the other document that's in this module. Photography is to draw with light. Lost America is a guy from the Bay Area who goes out to abandoned junkyards and buildings and crazy places around in the desert. And at night he takes flashlights with filters and he basically paints with light. And then there's another little painting with light YouTube video here that's fun. But if you just search painting with light, you'll find way more information than you ever dreamt possible. So in the classroom, when it's face to face, we go into the studio, turn off the lights, and demonstrate this. I do believe I have a video that I linked to from a past demonstration. Again, some of these impromptu videos are just shot with the phone, and they're probably not the best quality, but it gives you kind of an idea of what happened in the demo in the classroom, and may get you started on thinking about this painting with light idea. We're going to have an assignment coming up with that, so you'll have an opportunity to do some of that on your own and experiment just a little bit. Okay, so that wraps up the artificial light module. Take care and have a good